Open ocean, Western Pacific, daytime operations. The sea was calm, visibility was excellent, routine conditions for a carrier strike group moving through contested waters. Nothing suggested danger until a US Navy destroyer operating as a carrier escort noticed something that immediately raised alarms, not visually, not audibly, electronically. The first warning, not a missile. There was no launch plume, no sudden maneuver by the opposing ship, no radio warning. Instead, a sequence of sensor readings appeared almost simultaneously across multiple consoles. Tracking behavior changed. Not search radar, not navigation, something more precise. Why this mattered immediately. Search radars sweep wide areas. Missile guidance radars do not. They narrow, they focus, they calculate, and that distinction changes everything. Unverified, initial radar assessment. Unverified OSINT later suggested the Chinese warship's emissions matched patterns consistent with missile fire control or targeting simulation modes. No official confirmation of radar type or mode was released, but to the operators aboard the US destroyer, the implication was chilling. This looked like strike preparation. The Chinese warship, several nautical miles away, a Chinese surface combatant, maintained a steady course. No visible weapons movement, no abrupt speed change, no hostile maneuver. That calm exterior made the electronic behavior even more unsettling, because missile strikes don't begin with explosions, they begin with math. What simulated missile strike really means. Simulation doesn't mean harmless. In military terms, it can involve target acquisition, fire control radar activation, tracking solutions, timing calculations, everything except the actual launch, which makes it a rehearsal, not a bluff. The escort's role and why it mattered. This wasn't just any ship. The US destroyer was operating as part of the carrier's defensive screen, a critical layer designed to absorb threats before they reach the carrier itself. Targeting the escort sends a message, "I can get through you." The bridge goes quiet. Inside the destroyer, there was no panic, just silence. Reports flowed upward, systems synchronized, every second was logged. The ship did not immediately maneuver. That restraint was intentional. Reacting too fast could escalate. Reacting too slowly could invite disaster. Unverified, command awareness. Unverified reports later suggested the radar activity was quickly shared across the broader strike group via secure data links. No official acknowledgement was made, but this was no longer a single ship issue. Why this was a dangerous game. Simulating a missile strike collapses reaction time. It forces commanders to consider the unthinkable. What if this isn't a simulation? What if the next step is real? What if a system error triggers something irreversible? History is filled with near wars that began exactly this way. The US destroyer responds without escalation. The ship made a small adjustment, barely noticeable to the naked eye, a slight change in speed, a minor course correction, but to a targeting system, that shift matters. It disrupts firing solutions, forces recalculation, buys time. Unverified targeting geometry. Some unverified analysts later suggested the maneuver was designed to complicate simulated intercept calculations. This remains speculative, but the timing was precise. The Chinese warship does not disengage. That was the most troubling part. The radar behavior continued. The Chinese vessel held course. No clarification over radio. No visible de-escalation. This was not accidental activation. This was intentional signaling. The standoff begins. Minutes passed. The simulated targeting behavior persisted. Every second increased pressure, not just on the ship, but on the entire strike group, because escorts are meant to protect. If an escort is being rehearsed against, the carrier is being warned. Why no one wanted to make the first loud move? If the US destroyer escalated electronically, it could trigger a response. If it illuminated weapon systems, it could redefine the encounter. If it turned away, it could signal weakness. The only safe option was measured control. The air wing feels it too. Above the horizon, carrier-based aircraft adjusted patrol patterns, not dramatically, not urgently, but enough to widen coverage and prepare contingencies. No one said it aloud, but everyone understood. This situation could turn fast, the moment everything shifted. Then, something changed. The Chinese warship altered its radar profile. Not off, not disengaged, refined, and almost simultaneously, it adjusted its course by a few degrees. Cliffhanger. Was this the end of the simulation, or the final step before something far more dangerous? Because what happened next forced US commanders to decide whether this was a controlled provocation or the opening move of a real attack. The shift, something changed. When the Chinese warship altered its radar behavior, the atmosphere aboard the US destroyer changed instantly, not because the threat disappeared, but because it evolved. evolved. The signal profile no longer resembled a steady targeting simulation. Instead, it became intermittent, refined, almost probing, like a hand testing a locked door rather than trying to kick it in. This was no accident. This was deliberate. Why intermittent targeting is more dangerous. Continuous targeting is provocative. Intermittent targeting is manipulative. It keeps the opposing crew guessing. Is the system calibrating? Is this a handoff between sensors? Is another platform being cued? In naval warfare, uncertainty is a weapon. Unverified. Radar mode interpretation. According to unverified OSINT analysis, the radar behavior may have shifted from a pure fire control simulation into a hybrid tracking and data sharing mode, potentially cueing other platforms. This has not been confirmed by official sources, but the implication was clear. This was no longer just about the destroyer. The carrier strike group responds quietly. The carrier itself did not maneuver dramatically. That's important. A carrier turning away signals vulnerability. A carrier turning towards signals aggression. Instead, the strike group adjusted spacing. Subtle changes invisible to civilian tracking systems, but obvious to military sensors. Destroyers widened arcs. Cruisers adjusted relative bearings. Undersea assets shifted silently. This was choreography. Under the surface, the unseen response. Beneath the waves, the situation grew even more complex. US undersea sensors began prioritizing acoustic clarity. No confirmed hostile submarines were detected, but detection is not presence, and presence is not intent. Unverified. Undersea posture. Some unverified reports suggest US submarines may have repositioned to create overlapping detection zones around the carrier group. This remains speculative, but in modern naval warfare, submarines are not just weapons, they are leverage. The Chinese warship holds the line. Despite the shift in radar behavior, the Chinese vessel did not retreat. It held its course. That alone sent a message. Backing down would suggest uncertainty. Advancing would suggest escalation. Holding position suggested confidence, and confidence is contagious or dangerous. Why this was a strategic signal, not a tactical one. This encounter was never about sinking a destroyer. It was about signaling capability. By simulating a missile strike on an escort ship, China demonstrated detection capability, tracking precision, proximity confidence, psychological pressure, all without crossing the line into actual violence. That is modern gray zone warfare. The US command dilemma. US commanders faced three options. 1. Escalate electronically, risking rapid escalation. 2. Withdraw, signaling deterrence failure. 3. Absorb the pressure, maintaining presence without reaction. They chose the third, and that choice mattered. Why restraint can be more powerful than force. Restraint denies the opponent a narrative. No reaction, no panic, no retreat, just quiet competence. But restraint does not mean passivity. The countermeasures you don't see. Electronic warfare is invisible. During the standoff, signal environments likely shifted. Background noise increased. Sensor fusion algorithms adjusted priorities. No jamming was visible, but that doesn't mean nothing happened. Unverified electronic defensive measures. Unverified analysts speculate that passive electronic countermeasures may have been employed to complicate tracking without triggering escalation. This remains unconfirmed. In naval warfare, silence can be louder than noise. The moment of maximum tension. For several minutes, both ships existed in a fragile equilibrium. No weapons moved, no alarms sounded, no radio calls were made. This was not diplomacy. This was deterrence at knife-edge distance. One misinterpreted signal, one faulty sensor, one nervous decision. That's all it would have taken. Then the break. Without warning, the Chinese warship altered course. Not sharply, not dramatically, just enough to change the geometry. The radar behavior shifted again, this time away. Why this was the most important move of the entire incident. Disengagement doesn't always look like retreat. Sometimes it looks like turning just enough, deprioritizing a target, ending the exercise without announcement. This was not surrender, it was conclusion. Unverified, de-escalation intent. Unverified assessments suggest the maneuver was designed to signal completion of the simulated strike scenario, rather than withdrawal under pressure. No official confirmation exists, but the message was received. The US response, discipline until the end. The US destroyer did not pursue. It did not illuminate weapons. It did not celebrate. It simply maintained position and continued its mission. That restraint closed the encounter. Why this incident matters far beyond these two ships. This wasn't just about one escort and one warship. It was a rehearsal for future conflict dynamics. dynamics, a test of nerves, command discipline, escalation control, and both sides were watching closely. The strategic takeaway: China demonstrated confidence in proximity operations, willingness to simulate escalation, control over engagement thresholds. The US demonstrated refusal to be coerced, superior escalation discipline, commitment to presence. No missiles fired, but messages were exchanged. Why these simulations are becoming more frequent? Because they work. They generate headlines, they test reactions, they shape narratives, and they do so without triggering war. This is the battlefield of the 21st century. What makes the next incident more dangerous? Each encounter lowers the psychological barrier. Each simulation makes the next step feel smaller, and someday, someone may miscalculate. Final thought: the real weapon was control. The most powerful weapon used that day was not a missile, it was restraint, because both sides proved something important. They can get very close without crossing the line.